Thank you very much for taking the time again. I'd like to start my first question with a quote from Bob Seger. With the echoes of the amplifiers ringing in your head, you came from tour and kind of like suddenly started writing new material. You came from tour, had new material. What kind of cool ringing of the amplifiers was that you took into the studio to write material?
Well, I wrote during the tour. So I have my phone and I just play basically my electric guitar with no amp, and I just sit in the dressing room or my hotel room and I just play, and then every time I come across a cool idea, I stick it on my phone, and when the tour was over, I had accumulated, you know, I don't know, close to 100 different little things.
Okay.
And then I pick out which one of those is still good, you know, after months later, you know, and then take it into a rehearsal room and start showing it to Brent and Todd, and sort of work up the idea that I have, and we sort of loosely put it together and send it off to Miles. So I guess the ringing of the ears is a constant, you know.
I know you're a solid guy and you kind of stick to your guns as far as it goes for gear and amps and guitars, but what kind of maybe new gear took place for writing the new material?
Well, I mean, really, it was just a Marshall half stack and a Les Paul. That was it. Very little wah pedal on this record. The thing that I introduced that was different was, for some reason, I was really into the Phase 45.
I was just gonna say.
So that was the first time I've ever used that I can remember in the studio. I used that at rehearsal, and I used my, I had a chorus for one thing, and that was it. So those are the only two pedals. Then when we got in the studio, I used those two pedals. I also had a really fantastic Leslie pedal, which is, I don't know if you're familiar with it. I ordered it ages ago and it finally came, so I used that for a little bit. And
do you know the brand?
Leslie.
It's an original Leslie. Okay,
yeah.
okay.
And then I had that Slash, that Dunlop MXR fuzz octave pedal that I worked with those guys. I was using I'm trying to remember the name of it now. Rivera.
Oh, okay.
They are not the amps, but they have these attenuators, which are fantastic. It has an EQ on it, and it really actually was something that sort of molded the overall sound a little bit more. It was, you know, just an added thing to it. Other than that, it was just a couple of brand new Marshall 800 and an old Marshall 100 watt that I borrowed from somebody. And those two together pretty much made up my guitar sound for the record.
I know that Miles is pretty much into diesel amps. Did you try one of these as well? You did? No.
I didn't even know he was into diesel amps. I don't know.
I met him a couple of years ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. We did a rig rundown with Mark Tremonti in Alter Bridge, and met him, and he was talking to diesel, and I was just thinking.
No. I mean, the only experiment, like, I did all my stuff. I have a Les Paul and a gold top that I did primarily like speaker right, and speaker left. I used different combinations of things just to sort of create a gap between the two different guitar sounds. And I used a lot of Junior and, believe it or not, hollow bodies. And I had
Do you know which
yeah, an ES-135 and an ES-175.
Great guitars.
And yeah, they're phenomenal, especially rock and roll. I was really big ass fucking things, but it was really cool. And then I used like a bunch of different variations of amps for the other side. So it'd be a Marshall and a high watt, or a Marshall and an orange, or
That's interesting.
different things, just to sort of be different than the sound that I always use on my side, you know.
It's kind of interesting that you say that, because you work with Michael Elvis Baskett, the producer, who already did work with Incubus, and the sound of the album is really organic. It's not that overproduced, flat, crappy, blah blah sounds. It is raw, it is organic, and you can hear the amplifiers breathe.
Right. Well, we did it to tape, as is my thing. When I talked to Mike, because I'd never worked with him before, you know, we talked on the phone about potentially him producing the record, because I really liked the way the last Alter Bridge record, you know, the drums and the bass sounded phenomenal. So I talked to him because I had to find out whether he was, you know, most engineers can't use tape. They don't even know what that means these days. And so I talked to him, and he was, you know, the main tape engineer at NRG in LA. So I was like, oh, there's a start. And then we had a long talk about guitar sounds and stuff. And he was as passionate about guitar sound as I was. So I said, you're hired, you know. And then so when we went in the studio, he has a fantastic work ethic, you know, because I'm a workaholic. And I need somebody that I can work with in the studio that is willing to go the extra mile. And he was so open-minded, and what we both were striving to get was something that was very real and very natural sounding. So it was a good combination. He actually overworked me, you know. He had me really, he really pushed me in the
So he drank even more coffee than you.
Yeah, we drank a lot of coffee.
Let's go back to the album, Battleground. This cool Beatles-like
It's
chorus.
the third time I've heard that today.
I'm sorry to be the third one, but
I don't think the Beatles normally comes up that often, so it's been interesting.
I was surprised. I mean, it was great.
But it was, you know, when we had the rest of the song, and it didn't have any kind of like what you call a real epic chorus in it. It was just sort of like this, but very cool. So we didn't want to change it. And started talking about what we could do to really add a really nice anthemic thing to it. And Miles had that melody, and we just put the chords together. And
I think it's a great idea. It really opens
it's like a
the song.
7-minute song because of that.
When you've already presented the material to Miles, so he knows the material, you come into the studio, do you sit together and stick it together with the electric guitars, or
Rehearse in this room, and fucking high volume.
is that so?
Yeah, and you know, I keep sending him every day what the three of us have been working on, and so he comes up with his ideas, and then when he's done with his tour, he flies in, and we just sit in the studio and just work it out. But a lot of it, you know, it turns out most of the arrangements I send him are sound enough for him to have built his sort of lyrics and melodies on top of. And we change some things around, but the bulk of the arrangement's already done. And he puts the vocals on top of that. And yeah, we just do it real loud in the studio.
Shadow Life. Let's talk about that song. It sounds like a typical Slash riff. Then it again sounds very much like the way Miles works on vocals. It's very familiar in terms of knowing him from Alter Bridge as well. There's a solo part in that song that's kind of like has this live moment. Did you compose it, or did you compose every solo, or did you jam it into the box?
I don't compose anything. When it comes to solos, that's always a really gray area. What I do is you write the song and you sort of have a feel for what the solo is going to be, and you pick out what you think the solo changes are going to be, or what you hear anyway, and then you just play live, just in the moment, and whatever that first thing is. And that's usually the basis of how you're going to play that solo section every day at rehearsal. So you just play it every day, and the solo starts to take some sort of a shape. Even though you never play it the same way twice, the melody starts to present itself. So by the time you go in the recording studio, mostly it's sort of there. You sort of know how it starts, and maybe, after a couple takes, the middle, you'll go, okay, I guess this is sort of the way that it feels like it should go. You know what I mean? It's never like note for note worked out.
But you're not nailing it together with the band in the box on tape while jamming it. The other guys have already recorded the song, and afterwards you're going to put the solo on it, right? Yeah,
so however it is that I've been playing it, like when I go in to do the guitar, I just sort of like, okay, because it's a little ways later, you've been doing rhythm guitar all day. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so you just go in and you just go for that thing that you hear, If you listen to a rehearsal tape from a month before, the structure of it has already presented itself, and so you sort of have a basis of where to go. So it's not exactly the same, but sort of the structure of it is the same, I guess is the best way to put it. I've been doing it that way forever, you know, just like being as impromptu as possible, just going with where you feel, you know. And then once you hit that spot, it always comes out similar from that point forward.
So there's a lot of hope for a lot of young guitar players who think that they have to compose everything.
I don't know why.
And they struggle in the studio with their own composition.
Yeah, I don't know how that trend started. I mean, all the bands that I think that I grew up listening to, for the most part, even with Jimmy Page stuff, there's a certain amount of abandon in those solos, you know, or say Cheap Trick or Aerosmith Stones or whatever. And then somewhere along the way, it became like a note for note structural. This is how the solo goes, you know. But for me, there's no unpredictability or any room for spontaneity if you do it that way.
Do you sit down and still practice, or is touring, playing, performing practice enough?
I'm always playing, right? I hate to use the word practicing because it's too sterile and too rigid and too academic a word. You know what I mean? Like, so I play a lot. So I carry my guitar around and I just play stuff and come up with ideas or whatever. And then I might work on something for a while or come up with something and go, oh, how to get this down. But I spend most of my time playing either in the studio or live or, you know, jamming or whatever. So that's really what keeps my chops up. I've noticed a long time ago that no matter how much I sit down and practice, does not necessarily apply to a live performance. You might have some idea of what you're doing, but the physicality of it is totally different. So you have to play in a live setting or in a recording setting where you're in the heat of the moment, and keep doing that all the time to really hone in on your just ability. When you practice, you can practice and get something down pat, but if you go and play it spontaneously in a live situation, you'll find that it doesn't come to you the way it did there, sitting on the couch. It's a whole different trip. So the more you do that, the more spontaneous, the more stuff that you're able to access in a live situation or even in a recording situation. I hate to sit in the studio and sit on a chair and play, you know, I just don't do that. So I play standing up and I play like, you know, here comes the part and you go for it. You know, I play rhythm up until then and then you just go for it. Then you don't have time to go back and sort of like work out what you were sitting on the couch doing, you know.
Would you say that jamming together with other, you know, fellow musicians like Joe Perry or Billy Gibbons or...
It's essential.
Is it?
Yeah, it's because you have to get out of the safety net of just practicing for hours, whatever, runs, scales, all these different things, and you're just sitting there. I like to look at practicing as an exercise that you just sort of keep yourself limber and stuff, but for playing in the real world, you have to go out and jam, you know, and playing with different guys who obviously have more experience or just, you know, people that you're influenced by or inspired by, or people who are just so fucking good, whatever the deal is. Playing with those kind of people and flying by the seat of your pants and really being in the moment and having to fucking rise to the occasion, that's been the best way for me to do it.
Did the new record get some inspiration from fellow colleagues and fellow musicians?
In what sense?
Since there's no guest appearance on the album, since as far as I know.
No, we're just influenced by us in that moment. You know, we're just trying to make a record.
That sounds cool.
We're jamming amongst each other and just trying to achieve whatever it is that, you know, the best version of the song that we can, and, you know, get all the dynamics together and be able to play it live, you know. And that's really the majority of what's really going on when we're actually, you know, working on a song and recording it or whatever. You know, there's stuff that I'm listening to at the time in my car or whatever when we're going back and forth to production.
What are you listening in your car? What kind of music?
Well, I mean, my favorite rock record that came out while we were making this record was the new Motorhead record.
Is that so?
It's just phenomenal.
It is.
So that was a big one. You know, I was listening to a lot of Wes Montgomery before. Like during the tour, especially, you know, before we made the record, I was listening to a lot of that.
younger bands like Monster Truck?
No, Monster Truck, I have the record and it was great, but it came out way before we started pre-production. I think Gojira was one of the bands I was listening to at the time. But, you know, and I was listening, you know, some Albert King stuff.
Do you from time to time check out the older albums as well?
No. The only time you ever listen to an older record is if you're trying to remember something for the tour.
The tour, right.
Yeah. So I wouldn't say anything that I've done prior has any influence on what you're doing at the moment, you know.
Okay, that makes sense. Slash, thank you very much for
Cool.
doing this interview.
Yeah, no, it's nice talking.
It was a pleasure.